So today we're going to talk about how to study as a gifted kid. If you're a gifted kid, you may have noticed this pattern of what feels like you ran into a wall in life. For the first couple of years, everything was super easy. You went to school, you didn't really need to study, you didn't need to really work very hard, you were getting pretty good grades. And then eventually things started to get very, very difficult. You got bored very easily, you felt really overwhelmed, you started falling behind. And then what started to happen is you tried to fix it, right? You tried to learn how to study. You looked around at other people who were studying and you were like, okay, so I just need to read this textbook. I just need to do these worksheets and then I'll be fine. I want to take a moment to thank our HG coaches. I've taught at a lot of different places and worked with a lot of different people. And honestly, our coaches are some of the best people I've ever worked with. HG coaches have helped over 10,000 people find purpose, direction, and improve their mental health. After about 20 weeks of coaching, the average client experiences a 58% improvement in sense of purpose in life, a 45% improvement in feelings of anxiety, and even a 35% reduction in feelings of despair. And this isn't just me saying this. At this point, we've done this for 3 years, run 6 research studies, and even presented our findings at the American Psychiatric Association National Conference. Over 100,000 sessions later, I can confidently say this works. So if you're interested in checking out HG coaching for yourself, go to HealthyGamerGG/coaching to learn more. But for some reason, when you sit down to actually do that, it doesn't really work, right? Either you get bored very, very easily, or it feels like you're too far behind and you're not really sure what's going on. And then you kind of end up abandoning it. And so you kind of create this pattern of getting super interested in something, getting excited about it, investing some amount of time, but then eventually you kind of get bored or it starts to get too difficult and you're not really sure what to do. And you look at other people who are actually able to like devote time and energy to things and like build a foundation and build up on that foundation. But it sort of feels like your life is kind of like, 100 wells that are dug 1 foot deep instead of one well that's 100 feet deep. And the bizarre thing is that you can sometimes come away from this situation thinking, oh, okay, this is because I'm lazy. This is what most gifted kids conclude, right? I'm lazy. That's why I'm not successful. I'm smart, but I'm lazy. As it turns out, it's not that you're lazy, it's that you were never really taught how to study because, first of all, your brain is a little bit different, right? So you're going to need different techniques, which we're going to share with you today. And secondly, there are some things in your development that actually made it very hard for your brain to really like learn how to focus on a particular task. So for me, this really became super clear when I was talking to my mom many, many years later. And I kind of asked her a little bit about like, when I was growing up, like what, I don't remember you reading with me. I don't remember you kind of doing homework with me. I was kind of thinking about it and I was like, can you help me understand a little bit about like, what was your parenting style? And it sort of felt like my parents were uninvolved. And her answer absolutely blew my mind, but it made perfect sense. And she's like, well, you were getting A's, so I didn't think I needed to do anything, right? I mean, you didn't seem to be having any trouble at school. You would go to school. You were like 7 years old. You'd come home. You'd get straight A's on your report card. So like, why would I need to do something if you were actually getting straight A's to begin with? And that's when it kind of clicked for me, right? So a lot of parents, what they do is they don't intervene with their kids. They don't build habits for their kids if your kid is doing everything right. Generally speaking, as a parent, what you try to focus on is what your kid is doing wrong. Then the problem runs into as we get older, right? So you can learn like second grade math or third grade math or, maybe even like pre-algebra kind of on your own. But then we sort of end up learning like pre-calculus and calculus. And that's when you can't just listen to one lecture and absorb everything and know everything. But then when you sit down to actually study calculus, because what you start to do is you look at other people, right? It doesn't sink in. You start to feel a little bit overwhelmed. So today what we're going to do is teach y'all a sort of a method to learn how to study as a gifted kid. And it's not just studying necessarily. It's also sort of this general idea of if you're a smart kid who has trouble focusing and gets bored very easily, what are some techniques that you can use to train your mind to stay focused on something and really build a foundation? And so these are techniques that I've used myself and I've taught to a lot of people, both as a tutor, as an attending physician, as someone who works with a lot of like gamers who are behind in life, and they really work really well. So we're going to sort of focus on three things. The first thing we're going to talk about is a little bit about motivation and how to retain focus. The second thing we're going to talk about is how to deal with boredom, because that's a huge problem. And the third thing is we're going to lay out a lot of actually like details on how to study, which I know it sounds kind of bizarre, but like chances are no one ever actually did that for you. But if we can lay it out for you, you'll be amazed at how much you can actually progress. So let's start with the issue of motivation. So gifted kids tend to run into a general problem, which is that either they get bored really easily, so they stop doing it, or they feel way overwhelmed. It feels way too difficult. They feel way too far behind. And so then they give up, right? So the two problems of a gifted kid is that you're easily bored and you give up easily. So let's try to understand a little bit about the science of motivation. So the first thing to understand is that if we look at the science of motivation, we know that to optimally motivate human beings, we need to be in a state of something called eustress. That's EU-stress. So eustress is the opposite of distress. And we actually want some amount of stress to focus our minds. And if y'all play games, you'll understand this, because if you think about a boss fight, right? Like you can grind on normal enemies and that gets boring, but then the boss fight is like more exciting. Why is it more exciting? Why are we more engaged? Because it's actually more difficult. So games are really good at sort of creating the sense of eustress, where we're not overwhelmed, but we're also, it's not so easy that we're bored. So as a gifted kid, how do we actually find that level of eustress? How do we take those boring tasks, and I know this sounds kind of bizarre because this is probably something you've never tried to do, and make them more difficult? And how can we take those overwhelming tasks and break them apart? So there's one thing that I really learned that may change your studying a lot, which is I want you to stop studying to learn and start studying to teach. So this is super cool, because when you think about sitting down to study, usually what your mind is going to do is it's going to say, oh, I have to get through these 5 chapters. I have to do all these worksheets. I have to do this. I have to do this. There's sort of this idea that there's no enjoyment behind it, right? Because you have to get through it. But instead, what I want y'all to do is study for the purpose of teaching someone else. Imagine that you've got a group of students that's going to come to you in 24 to 48 or 72 hours, and you are going to have to teach this concept to them. That's going to engage a couple of really interesting things. The first is that you're going to focus on conceptual learning as opposed to getting through stuff. And getting through stuff is incredibly boring. The second thing that it's going to do is it's going to kind of like motivate you, because it's actually a little bit harder. You don't have to do the bare minimum. And if you're a gifted kid, right, most of your life you've been skating through doing the bare minimum. And what you really want to do is you want to stop doing the bare minimum. And how do you do that? You start studying to teach. So the other cool thing is that as you start studying to teach, it's going to form all of these conceptual learnings, and you're really going to have to master the material. Then what happens is, since you've got a goal, it's not getting through the chapter. It's like, okay, do I need to read this section of the chapter to be able to teach this concept? Yes or no? And if you don't have to read it, then you can skip past it, and you're kind of like focused on kind of completing this quest, which aligns a lot of your efforts. And so this is the first thing that I'd strongly, strongly recommend that you kind of reframe from, is don't try to get through the material. Try to tell yourself that you're kind of here to teach. That's also going to engage a couple of other interesting things. The first is that gifted kids, generally speaking, are really good at helping other people. Like usually you won't do stuff for yourself, but you're actually totally fine helping other human beings. And so that's going to sort of engage some degree of focus. And the other thing is it can be a little bit gratifying to the ego, which, let's be honest, sometimes gifted kids kind of need, right? So like what's going to happen is your ego, you may feel a little bit insecure, you may feel a little bit behind. But if you can actually sort of do something that is more aligned with your view of yourself, it'll actually help you study more. So the first tip to really focus on motivation is to study to teach instead of to learn. So the second thing that we're going to talk a little bit about is dealing with boredom. Now, this is kind of a really tricky situation, but generally speaking, the first thing you've got to accept as a gifted kid who's trying to study or learn some task, like learn to play a music instrument, is that your mind will get bored. So it's not about the avoidance of boredom. It is about the management of boredom, and to set appropriate expectations around boredom. So let's start by understanding, okay, what does it mean to be bored? What is boredom in the mind? So boredom is your mind's way of punishing you for not engaging in dopaminergic activities. So your brain is there and it's figured out, oh, hey, like this guy, like we want some dopamine, right? So it's kind of like, it's like addicted to dopamine. And what it's going to do if you don't give it the dopamine is it's going to punish you. And the way it's going to punish you is it's going to make you feel bored. So if you think about what is boredom really, it is a stimulus-seeking impulse. So if we think about hunger, Hunger is an unpleasant sensation that prompts us to action, right? It's our body's way of telling you, hey, I need food, you should go eat something, and I'm going to make you suffer until you listen to what I say. Thirst is the same way, right? So these are physiologic drives that punish us for a particular lack in our body. And so what is the brain's equivalent of hunger or thirst? It's boredom. So when it doesn't get the dopamine that it wants, it's going to send signals that induce suffering and are going to push you to do something. So what we have to understand is that until our brain learns to listen to us in the same way that our bodies can learn to listen to us, right? Because we don't need that second piece of chocolate cake. We don't need that fifth slice of pizza. So we have to get in charge. But in order to get in charge, what we really have to do is learn how to manage that boredom. The way we're going to manage dealing with boredom actually has to do with our methodology of studying. And I don't know if anyone sat you down and taught you how to study, but that's kind of what we're going to do now. So the first thing that I'd strongly recommend is that you use something called the Pomodoro Technique. So the Pomodoro Technique is sort of based on some science, but basically is this technique where we're going to study for 20-minute increments. So you don't have to study for an hour. You don't have to get through 5 chapters of a textbook. You're going to study for 20 minutes, and then you're going to take a 5-minute break. And even if you feel like continuing to study after those 20 minutes, you are still going to take a break. And why is this part really important? Because we don't want your studying, whether you study or not study, to be based on how you feel. Because this is the problem that gifted kids run into. Oh, I'm excited about learning quantum mechanics. I feel excited. So I'm going to crack the textbook and I'm going to start reading. And now I feel bored. So I'm going to close the textbook and I'm going to open up a video game and I'm going to queue for some MOBA or whatever, right? We want to stop having our brain listen to our feelings. So we're going to study for a 20-minute segment, which is 1 Pomodoro, and then we're going to take a 5-minute break. During that 20-minute segment, what we're really going to focus on in terms of how to study is a concept or synthesis, as opposed to getting through particular material. So in this 20-minute break, what you sort of need to do is sit down and think a little bit about, okay, what are the different things that I want to focus on today? So for this 20-minute segment, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to learn about, let's say, I don't know, Newton's third law. Right? So I'm going to learn about as much as I can about Newton's third law. So then you've got your textbook, you kind of flip through it, you read a paragraph, you take some notes, like whatever you end up doing, but you're going to study for 20 minutes and then you're going to take a 5-minute break. So there are a couple of other things about boredom that we really, really, really need to understand. So the first is that when we get bored, if we have an opportunity for a long-term distraction, then we're going to be in trouble. So what we really want to do is if we get bored for 30 seconds and we pull out our phone, like we could lose 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 15 minutes, or an hour. So what we really need to do is protect ourselves against that boredom. We want to understand that, okay, in 20 minutes, I'm going to get to take a break. So I just have to last for 20 minutes. And the other thing that you need to be super careful about is pre-lay out your resources. So for that 20-minute block, what I want you to do is open up all the tabs that you need, get all the worksheets that you need, find your textbook, get everything out. Because when do we slip up when we study is if I have to open a new tab and I have to search for something and it goes to my home page and a lot of apps and crap are like, now like, oh, like click this, clickbait, you're going to slip into clickbait. So what you want to do to avoid boredom or having boredom take advantage of you is lay out all of your resources ahead of time, set a 20-minute target, and then once you start, you go. The third thing that we're going to talk about today is how to study, right? So we're going to go into more detail not just about the boredom piece, but what's our system of studying. So we talked a little bit about, first of all, focusing on synthesis or concepts, because that'll make you feel less bored because you're going through less stuff, right? There's a real target. So what we're going to do with synthesis or concepts is I strongly recommend physically writing if you can. So what I like to do is I'll take one piece of paper. Well, I'll try to synthesize all of my concepts, right? So you want to take kind of like one piece of paper that's Newton's third law, and that's what you're going to be focused on. Then as you read, as you do worksheets, as you do practice questions, everything is going to go synthesized into that piece of paper. We're studying for 1 Pomodoro. We're already making all of our tabs and stuff ready. And there are a couple of other tips about how to study. One thing that a lot of gifted kids never actually do is review. So this is probably because we didn't need to review, right? So when you were learning how to learn, or maybe a better way to put it is when you were being conditioned on how to learn, you never needed review because everything just kind of sunk in and you were able to do it. So what I'd strongly recommend is that you sort of do 1 Pomodoro at a time. You do 3 Pomodoros in one day. That's it, right? So when we're starting off, you want to do 60 to 75 minutes of studying a day. And then what you want to do the next day is spend 1 Pomodoro reviewing the work that you've done before, okay? So you want to do 3 Pomodoros a day. Spend at least, the next day, you want to spend at least 1 Pomodoro reviewing your prior work. The other thing that we really want to do is control our environment. So it can actually be very, very helpful for you to study at some place like the library. There are other things that I'll do, like studying tips that I literally would do is I'd take my laptop and I'd push it away from my desk when I was studying, and I'd have my notebooks in front of me. Because if you think about it, when you get distracted, it's really easy to get distracted if you have access to your keyboard. And even now, what I'll do is I'll take my keyboard. I have this fancy split keyboard now, but what I'll do is I'll like literally like move the keyboard away from me if I'm trying to work and have access only to my mouse. Because it's really hard to like get distracted on Reddit if I can't type Reddit in. So you want to create some physical barriers around distractions as well. So you can go to the library, you can like move your keyboard away, you can push your laptop physically away, you want to lay out all of your resources, and you want to do 3 Pomodoros at a time. The last 2 things that we're going to talk about, I'd strongly, strongly recommend putting your phone on Do Not Disturb or even leaving it in a different room, and what to do when we take breaks. So when we take breaks, our most natural impulse is going to be to pull out a piece of technology, but don't do that. When we take breaks, all we're going to do is get up and walk around. So for 5 minutes, you can drink water if you want to, you can walk around, but no technology usage, no mental stimulation. Just get up, walk around for 5 minutes. And this is what's really cool is if you walk around for 5 minutes, you're done walking. You're done with your break. You're ready to stop doing your break and going back to studying. But if you take a break by playing a video game, what's going to happen at the end of the video game? You're going to want to play another one. So our break time has to also be very carefully constructed. I know it sounds kind of bizarre, but studying is something that you can actually formally learn how to do. It's a skill, just like meditating or learning to ride a bike or even playing a video game. The challenge is that if we are gifted kids, what we run into is the situation where we never needed to learn the proper conditioning in terms of how to study, right? We never learned how to study. We didn't learn how to learn. And so now what we have to do is kind of bypass that. And this is something that I honestly discovered as a psychiatrist, because I'd have gifted kids coming into my office getting diagnosed with depression. And what I started to realize is like, I can do psychotherapy on them for depression as much as we want, but at the end of the day, this kid is never going to feel good about themselves unless they're actually able to like accomplish stuff. And what I sort of noticed was that treating these people for depression, I actually started to teach them some of these techniques. And the really bizarre thing is that these were things that were not taught to me as a psychiatrist. There's not, we learn about like bipolar disorder and electroconvulsive therapy. No one ever teaches us, hey, here is how you teach a kid to be successful in life. And by the way, that deficiency is also why we started like HG coaching, right? Because I sort of noticed that even if you're struggling in life, there are kind of 2 solutions to struggling in life. One is you can see a mental health professional, which is absolutely fantastic, and they can help you with depression and anxiety and all that kind of stuff. But at the end of the day, like, who is going to teach you how to actually fix these skills? And that's a huge part of our mission here at HG, right? That's why we made this video. And if y'all are interested in something a little bit more, you can check out coaching. But honestly, like, this is where if you're a gifted kid, it honestly isn't your fault that you're kind of behind and you don't know how to study, because chances are you had a parent who was like mine, who looked at you when you were 7 years old and like, my kid is not having a problem, therefore I don't need to do something. But if you had a parent like that, and if school was so effortless and you didn't think there was a problem, right? It was working for you then. Eventually you hit this wall. And the really devastating thing is that once you hit the wall where you don't know how to study, you don't know how to be disciplined, then everything that you try sort of fails, because you look at what other people are doing. You recognize, oh my God, there's a problem. And then you look and you say, oh, that's this person next to me is sitting there at the library for 4 hours and they're studying and they're doing a great job. I need to do what they do, but they are not you. And it doesn't work, which is then how you conclude that I am lazy. And once you conclude I'm lazy, that starts to have all kinds of implications for you. And so in order to undo all this, which you absolutely can, start by understanding how to study in a particular way that is suited for gifted kids. And I've seen this work for a ton of people, and I sincerely hope it works for you.